everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to 10-Foot Pole, a podcast dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 25. I'm super excited. We have a special guest today. So we have Jamie Bruesehoff, who is an activist and the author of the book, Raising Kids Beyond the Binary, Celebrating God's Transgender and Gender Diverse Children. I'm really excited that you're here and that you're here to talk about this great book, great resource, really, for parents, churches, just kind of everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to be here and always happy to chat about this work and hopefully get this resource into the hands and on the radars of more people.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I already have just started handing it to people. Be like, well, here, why don't you do some work? Here's a great start.
I love that so much.
So today, as we kind of talk about something a little different, so like typically for our listeners, is we pick a Bible passage, usually in the Revised Common Lectionary, and that's what we talk about. But today, we're going to talk about the Bible a little bit, but we're mostly going to talk about the book. It's Pride Month, and we're going to highlight some books in this month that I think would be great at helping our listeners, everyone on their journey of both understanding maybe stuff around the Bible and LGBTQ plus folks and other things that could be helpful for church leaders that are trying to figure out where they should start or what to do as they attempt to, as I'm going to get into in chapter 10 of Jamie's book, love louder. Because I really love that phrase.
Yeah, I think it's just so simple and so real at what we need to do. Like, we just need to do this thing of loving that we think we're so good at and do it louder and more often.
And yeah, it's a big deal. So would you just for folks that maybe don't know who you are, just share a little bit about your story about because like I said, you didn't just like pop out of the ground an activist one day, right? Like this is something that is very personal to you and your family's journey.
Yeah, no, I sometimes use the term accidental activist
I like
some
that.
folks in the community use because this is not ever what I planned on doing. So I love to do it, but it was not the journey I anticipated. I am the parent of 3 wonderful children, and my oldest child, my daughter, is transgender. She's 17 years old now. Her name is Rebecca, and
I can't believe she's 17. You posted pictures from prom the other day, and I was like, oh my gosh, remember when she was just this cute little girl with like rainbow pigtails? Like, where did time go?
She is 17. Like 17. I can't, like, we just got her senior portraits back from
my
high school,
goodness.
and I was like, what is happening? So yeah, it is parenting in general is just an adventure. Let's be clear. But so Rebecca's transgender, which means that when she was born, we thought she was a boy, but she deeply knows herself to be a girl. And she socially transitioned to live as herself out in the world at 8 years old. And so in the process of raising her and walking on that journey with her, we've learned a lot. A lot. Yeah. And so it was interesting, like, as we walked along this journey with her in understanding who she is, and then educated the people around us, first with like our immediate family and then our extended family. And then also like our local community and her school and our church. So I am married to a Lutheran pastor.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm like, also your spouse is a Lutheran pastor. Yes, and so like exactly. To put that, like you guys maybe spend a lot of time at church.
A little bit, like we're a little bit lot church people. So so walking along this journey with our congregation at the time, my spouse was the pastor of a small congregation in a rural conservative part of New Jersey. And I always say rural and conservative in New Jersey may not mean what it means elsewhere, but there were cows really in my backyard. Yeah, there were cows.
It was really funny to me when you talk about rural conservative New Jersey. It is funny. Because you're also in like North Jersey, like that's also not the same.
Well, yeah, except like we were like above what most people think of
Well,
North
yeah, that's
Jersey.
true.
Like we were like in farm country where like New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania come together, and like
Where
it
there's
was
actually
rural.
skiing in New Jersey.
Yes, yes, on our large hill we call a mountain.
Hmm.
Like, but yeah, so like it was this deep red area, and our congregation, this was 9 years ago. The overwhelmingly our congregation had never met a transgender person that they were aware of,
Yeah.
and so this was a really new thing, and so we navigated like how to support them in their learning while protecting our child,
Yes,
and
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 that's a
that
key.
was yeah, it was like, and I, it can do both. Like, I think people think it's either or, and it's
Yeah.
not. Like, we need to protect the most vulnerable while also showing up for those that aren't like that are at the beginning of their learning journey, because
Yeah.
otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. We can't love louder until we learn a little in order to figure out
Yeah.
what that means.
Well, and you talk about that too, about like if you're at mile marker 17 and someone's at mile marker 2, you can't just expect them to like lightning up to where you're at, right? Like they still have
Yeah.
to like walk the path to put in the miles.
Yep, 100%. And so like for us that meant like
And that, for
setting
the record, is
boundaries.
a lot of grace. And I think that's what it takes. And I think sometimes even folks that are like they don't really know what to say or do, like hopefully the person that you're met with can understand and show grace. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Grace all around, and a willingness, like humility, a willingness to be
Hmm.
wrong, and a willingness to meet
Yeah.
people with grace, and understand that we're all going to get it wrong wherever we are on the
Yeah.
journey. Like, I feel like we just need to normalize that. And so we walked with our congregation, and that was an adventure. I use the word adventure a lot because I just feel like that's our life. And putting
Well, like it
boundaries in
didn't
place.
end horribly. You didn't immediately
No.
pick up and move to a new location, right? Like,
Exactly. No,
yeah,
and we were prepared for that. Like we
yeah,
were prepared. Like I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. So my spouse's income was our only income. We were living in a parsonage, like
yeah,
our home, like we were prepared to lose everything.
yeah.
And no, what we learned from that experience is that when you replace issues with human beings, that's where real change and learning and understanding happen. And so while people maybe didn't understand everything about what it meant to be transgender, or what that required of us to be in community with people, they
Hmm.
saw Rebecca, the little girl in front of them, and saw her joy and
Yeah,
the light in her exploding, and said, this is a child of God being who she's
yeah.
meant to be. And
You
so,
in that
yeah.
chapter, you actually made me cry about the person that you're like, it's that person. He's gonna say something and
Yeah.
gonna say something horrible, and for his only comment to be like, they've never talked to me before, and today they did. Like clearly something's different.
Yeah.
That you can
Yeah.
see that this child has been let out of a shell.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he said, I don't understand this whole transgender thing, but she used to hide behind you and refuse to say
Hmm.
hi to me on a Sunday morning. And today she ran up to me, twirled in her dress, and gave me a high five. What more is there to know? And
Yeah.
it's like that
Yeah.
phrase, that's everything.
That's
And the
yeah.
truth is, there's a lot more to know, but that's where we
Yeah.
start. Like, that's the foundation.
Well, and
Um,
understanding, so that's the, to me, that's the open heart, open mind of understanding that like there's so many things. Like I even just think about, other cultures and stuff like that. Like I don't know, but I have to go in with an open heart and open mind that those people know themselves and that those people find meaning in something that I don't understand, right? And it's not to say like
mhm.
mine's better than yours or what, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
for us, like to me, that's our call. The Hebrews, why is the phrase not coming to me? The 13 to remember to enter, however you entertain strangers, because by doing so, some have entertained angels without knowing it. But the Hebrews 1,
Hmm.
I preach about this all the time, so people have heard this. But the Hebrews 1, right before that verse, is keep on loving one another,
Mm,
right? It is only through
yeah.
this mutual love that you have that. And so, like, that's so,
Yeah.
to go in with open hearts and open minds to any relationship that, and to
Yes.
get really Lutheran for a moment, as Martin Luther would I can't speak today. Martin Luther's explication on the eighth commandment, right? Like, cloak them in your honor. You assume the best of people, not the worst. And so
Hmm.
when we enter the world that way to say, I don't understand,
Yeah.
but I see you
Yeah.
as a human, as a child of God, how does that change how we approach any situation?
Yeah, and that we don't have to understand it all. Like, I will never fully understand the experience of what it means to be transgender because I
Yeah.
am not.
Yeah.
But I can still learn and listen and love. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's all still very possible. And I don't need to be able to like fully comprehend and articulate. And I think we get stuck in the heady part of wanting to know all the things
Yeah.
when I don't need to know all the things to
Yeah.
love you.
Yeah. And that actually brings me to the next thing that I was hoping that we could kind of talk about that you brought up in the book. Something that you learned actually from Reconciling Works, which we've had Aubrey Thombold, their executive director, on the podcast before. So that's so folks are familiar. And you talked about the difference between lurid and hospitable curiosity. Would you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So Reconciling Works puts out, the first time I encountered it was in a workshop that Aubrey did, and it's in some of their materials, and talks about the idea that curiosity exists on a continuum with hospitable curiosity on one end and lurid curiosity on the other. Hospitable curiosity is curiosity that helps us show up in community with one another. It helps us, foster a mutual trust and respect, know what people need to feel known and seen and supported. Lurid curiosity is the reason we all slow down on the highway when there's an accident on the side of the road. Even if emergency personnel's already there, we have no ability or a plan to help. We just want to know what happened. Lurid curiosity is the reason reality TV exists.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
And also, that kind of lurid curiosity causes more accidents.
Yes. There's we have a term for it, the Gawker's delay.
Yeah.
We create traffic and accidents from that.
And as the South Carolinians listening, specifically those in the Charleston metro area, understand, this is why traffic never moves. That's it. There's an accident. It's not just there's busy. There's literally an accident every day. Every day.
Yeah. So lurid curiosity.
Whereas, to explain, hospitable curiosity is asking someone's dietary restrictions when you're going to cook for them. Yes. It's not, I don't need to know that you're allergic to peanuts other than I don't want to kill you when I cook for you.
Exactly. Minor detail. Lurid curiosity serves us. It's human nature and it's okay. We don't need to vilify or shame around it, but there's a place for it. We need to understand how we're using that. And hospitable curiosity serves others. And so that's the difference. So sometimes you've heard the phrase, maybe there is no bad questions. I'd like to suggest there are bad questions.
Oh yeah, there very are. Well, well, I'll just say too, for my experience too, people ask me very inappropriate questions, right? I've never once thought about asking about your sex life. Let's just assume your pastor's is also off limits.
Yes. So asking people about the details of their bodies or what they do with them in intimate relationships is never hospitable.
Yes.
Full stop.
It is not.
And a good rule, if you wouldn't want someone asking you a question, don't ask it of someone else.
Isn't that easy? Isn't that I can't that just seems so simple.
It does. It feels really simple.
It's really similar to something Jesus said.
Yeah, exactly. I will say that sometimes people are well, I don't understand, especially when I'm talking about the experience of raising a trans child, they're well, what does that mean medically, or they have questions or whatever. And that's real. You can want to learn about that. And I say this with caution, but Google is your friend. Check your sources. Yes. But you don't need to ask the human being in front of you to give you their medical history. That's not appropriate.
Yeah, they are also not the representative of every trans person that you're going to meet, or for me, every, gay person, queer person that you're going to meet. Everyone has very different stories. This isn't a one size fits all hat. And I'm sure your experience of going through life as, learning about yourself and your own gender, learning about yourself and your own attractions and sexuality is going to be even different than someone who has the same sexual orientation or preferences as you. Everyone has their own journey.
Yeah.
This is also why I think people find out later in life and they're well, because I remember this, my grandmother was a wonderful human, but sometimes did not have the caution feature attached to the filter in her mouth. And she also was had macular degeneration and was legally blind most of my life, so she couldn't see anything that was happening around her. And so she has no concept of like that person standing right there. And I remember we were at a funeral reception at a Catholic church, and someone had walked up and said hi to her or whatever, and she talked to everyone beautifully, having absolutely no idea who she was talking to because she couldn't see them. And then they'd walk away, and she would lean over to my grandfather and ask who she was just talking to. And he would tell her. And then I just remember sitting there, and all of a sudden goes, "Oh," as loud as can be. "Oh, I heard he's gay now." And I was like, "Oh my God, Grandma, you can't say those things out loud." And I know other people who like maybe have transitioned later in life, or other people who, sure. I also know couples that like were married to men and now they're not anymore. Like that's, and so people are like, well, how do they just randomly become that? And I was like, they don't, right? Like we just all have our own journeys of experiencing things. And part of it's like, we have to understand ourselves and we have to feel comfortable. And that's the part that like, it doesn't always mesh. And I think sometimes like it just takes people sometimes 20, 30 years to be able to say that to themselves and to others.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I came out as bisexual at like 35. I mean, admittedly, I just assumed everybody was bi, and I'm still a little bit in disbelief that y'all aren't, but
I am.
Well,
I agree with you. I had the same thing. I was like,
looking in diet rooms and I'm like, I swear, y'all, like, you sure you don't? Okay. Like, but yeah, like, I think that's the cool thing about young people today is that because there's more freedom in exploring and information and acknowledgement and awareness and visibility, that they're getting to know themselves better than most adults I know. Like we're still like figuring it out because we didn't have that space when we were their age.
So how do we one of my I don't want to say like biggest fears, but it's a big fear, a big source of anxiety and anger is how those spaces are being destroyed for kids by legislators.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean we're in this interesting place. I mean, interesting feels like the wrong word to use, but it is interesting in that there is so much hope. There is so much possibility. There's so much visibility. There's so much space. And there's so much hopelessness and these outright attacks on LGBTQ plus people, but specifically trans and non-binary people, and specifically trans and non-binary young people are relentless, and they're horrific, and they are impacting the ability of these young people to live their lives and be themselves safely in their communities and in the world. And understanding that is so important. Being aware, we talked, like we've mentioned education a bunch already, like learning about what's going on around you. And when you hear something that doesn't sound right, going, I wonder, and then learning more, because there's so much misinformation.
And also, so again, I'm also in a state right now that is attempting to attack the rights of medical care for trans youth. I do like, I feel a little hopeful that the first round that it went up, it got no votes, which is good. But because South Carolina is just slightly behind, the Floridas and the Iowas and stuff of the world. But like, we're hoping that like maybe we can, we're still fighting back on that. So like, we're not there yet, but I appreciate, as you said, it's never really appropriate to ask people, about their medical history, but also sharing a little bit about what a medical journey for someone could look like. Not that it necessarily does. And what those things are. And I think that's just like the way that you present it is helpful information. And I think the biggest deal that people need to understand for those that like don't understand what medical care for trans youth looks like, people are not doing quote sex changes to children.
Correct. Yeah. So the one
that is not a thing. It is not legal anywhere. Like no medical professional recommends that. It's not happening.
Correct.
Besides that one case where like that set of twins a long time ago where they accidentally chopped the kid's penis off and they just said it's fine, raise him as a girl. And then like that didn't work because the kid did not know themselves to be a woman. And instead finally came out as a man, lived a horrible life. He and his twin brother both killed themselves.
Well, yeah, when you talk about surgery with young people, the real travesty is the surgeries done on young people with intersex traits without their consent
Yes.
at birth that is happening and that we've carved out in these medical care bans.
That's happening less, I believe. Like that's no
there
longer best practice.
Yes, there's a lot of advocacy around it. It still
Mm-hmm.
happens, but we're trying to make sure, like, it's fascinating in the laws that are being passed. There's a carve out to allow those, whereas and sometimes
Yeah.
it's medically necessary, to be clear, but
So
often it's
yeah.
not. But South Carolina, your governor just signed the medical care ban yesterday. So
Did
I did want to
he?
tell you that. Yeah. So that was really sad.
I was really hopeful that we maybe weren't going to be that bad.
Yeah, yeah. I know some advocates in South Carolina, some families that have been fighting relentlessly, and I've just kind of been witnessing and cheering them on. And yesterday was a really devastating day, because now it's official. Yeah. So, like, we're talking about medical care. I think it's important to say that every major medical organization in the United States
Yes.
supports the standards of care for
Yes.
gender affirming care for young people. That does not include surgery for 5-year-olds. That's not a thing.
Yep.
But there is very clear standards of care in every major medical organization, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Endocrine Society, and I could go on and on. There's like 24 of them. Every single one agrees. And yet we have legislators that are like, actually, I think I know more about medicine than like doctors and families and humans.
Yeah, that's the thing that like what's really hard for me is that we do live in a system where those people get to make those decisions with no qualifications to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. It's bananas. Why are these people qualified to get to make my medical decisions, your medical decisions?
Yep. All while suggesting that they want to protect people's personal freedoms, which is like real.
Yeah. I don't even think that they even try to say that anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, but it's all like, so yeah, I will get into a far too political place.
I know. I'm sorry.
Need to go right now.
You've made me very sad. I was very hopeful up until this moment, but it's my fault. I missed that yesterday. I could have come into the conversation being up to date and I wasn't.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's now my crappy state. I'm working on it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So now we're at half of the states in the US have some form of medical care ban for transgender and non-binary young people, which is devastating because this care is medically necessary, evidence-based, and carefully administered by multidisciplinary teams of experts in concert with young people and their families. Like nothing is done unintentionally.
And the fear mongering around it. So the thing is always, well, if you do that, you're just going to let men into the women's room. And another book that I've read recently, also recommended by Aubrey, was He, She, They by Skylar Schuler.
Yeah.
And I like the way that Skylar puts it. He said, "You're not scared of trans women. You're scared of men."
Yes.
And let's unpack that for a minute and what that means, right? Like, and the, part of it, he really goes into like the hyper masculinity sort of society that we have. And like, that's what's being challenged more than anything. And that men are often, and why, and because of this view and this fear of men is why trans women are treated substantially different than trans men.
Well, yeah, and because the inherent misogyny of being so angry that trans women would be more feminine and like let go of some of their masculinity. Like it's this toxic hyper masculinity combined with the misogyny, and it's a mess. But then it's also like, I think about it when we're talking about young children. What are we teaching young boys when everything we're saying is about how scary men are? Like, that's not the messaging that they need to be raised with.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the issue, right? What and how do we socialize men? I think is, the root of the core issue that I think what most of this comes down to. It's the same thing with the LG and B part of it. Gay men are treated substantially worse than women. and have
Oh,
historically
absolutely.
been, because that's
Yep.
because the sin that they are committing is
Hmm.
emasculating themselves.
Yep.
And that is
Absolutely.
truthfully in our society. That is the sin of the LGBT community. And it's again,
Hmm.
it's why we treat those who are cis women or those who were born, assigned female at birth differently.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it all comes down to patriarchy. White supremacy and patriarchy is
Yep.
all the problems.
I mentioned this on last week's episode, which about we talked about sort of original sin. I sat down with a rabbi and talked about original sin. And my like theory, and I wrote a paper on this in seminary. I like the original sin is patriarchy, and I made a very
Mm.
very good argument on why that is the original sin.
Yeah. And we see that play out. Like, that is
Hmm.
so real.
Yeah, it's anyways. So this apparently is very needed in South Carolina right now, as well as many other places. But to say if you and your church community is like, well, we want to become hospitable, we just don't really know where to start or what to do or how to talk about things or where to start. I again, this is why I think that y'all should check out Raising Kids Beyond the Binary, which the link will be in the episode so people can easily access the book. There's a whole chapter. So chapter 10, Love a Little Louder, is really helpful as sort of what are easy, tangible things that you can do to make your congregation look or be more inclusive. And so you talked about as a parent, like you scour a place's website for these little hints that tell you where they're at. And I do the same thing. I can go to a church's website and easily tell you if
Yep.
something's written a certain way. I can tell you exactly that that's not a safe space.
Hmm.
Which is also another reason, like, I'm very big on challenging churches about the phrase all is welcome.
Yes.
For the reason of like, I actually sat through a Catholic church service one day, and they were singing Marty Haugen's All Is Welcome. And I about lost my mind. And my spouse
Mm.
Carly's like, AJ, you have to calm down. Zero people know that this is a quote Lutheran song. And I was like, they can't sing it. You and I both know we
Mhm.
sit in this pew. We are not welcome here. We are not welcome here
Yeah.
for who we are. We're not welcome here just because we're Lutheran. We're not welcome at that table. Don't sit here
Yeah.
and sing songs about all are welcome when you don't actually mean that.
Well, yeah, there's a difference between saying, like, you are welcome to walk into this space versus you are welcome to be a valued and
Yes.
seen and known member of this community. Those are two
Hmm.
different things. And I
Very
think we
different.
throw about those words like they're like all it means is that we allow you to walk in the door and we don't like attack you outright, maybe physically even,
Yeah.
because goodness knows we do with our words.
Yeah. I've also recently a colleague of mine kind of challenged me on the other side of the all is welcome spectrum of he's like, I made our church take down the all is welcome stuff when we had to issue a restraining order to someone.
Yes. Yes. I mean I write about this in the book in a
I
place
mean,
about
because
like
this is the
where is
same
the
thing.
limit
Like,
to
yeah,
all are welcome. And like I feel like we need to really wrestle with who is welcome here and what is welcome here. Sometimes I use and it's a simplified phrase, but I will use the phrase all beliefs can be welcome here, but all behaviors are not.
I like that.
And so, like, what is the separation? Now, to be fair, at some point, I feel like there's even a limit to all beliefs being welcome here. But,
Yeah.
like, and the second you say it out loud and the way you behave, but there are parameters. Does God love you? And are you a beloved child of God? Yes. But are you welcome in this community? Maybe not if you're harming people. That's
Yeah.
just got to be
Yeah.
real.
Yeah. It's true. And I think this is why churches really need to like have conversations around that. Um,
Yeah.
because for a few things, so again, as we talked about the language that you might find on a website or whatever, um,
Hmm.
there's little things like that, right? Like, what does the form say? Does it say mom and dad? Does it say parent one, parent two, or parent slash guardian? Like, or like,
Yeah.
even little things like that. My big one that I usually see is if in a faith statement, if all the he's are capitalized. for God.
Yes.
That usually tells me,
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, we know this is God's a
Yeah.
man. If we have sky daddy issues, we're not having you don't have space for me. I know that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always encourage like that chapter 10 is really like the handbook of a place
Mhm.
for churches to start. And so
Yeah,
like
it's
the
great. It's fantastic. I agree. And
yeah.
it's got a lot of
And
things that
so
people
like
probably overlook.
exactly. And so like when you want to think about what it means to be inclusive, go understand that it's got to flow through every single part of your community. It is the
Yeah.
facilities, yes, but it's also your administration, it's your forms, it's the language you use, it's what's on your website, it's what
Hmm.
symbols are you sharing, it's whether what language are you sharing pronouns, what are you doing about introductions? Like it is
Yeah.
so many things, and so many of those are really subtle, simple shifts.
Yeah.
Like, changing to parent guardian 1 and parent guardian 2 is so simple. It
Hmm.
doesn't harm anyone, and it doesn't even like I think right now sometimes people get concerned about like the political lightning rods of some of our acts of inclusion. Now
Yeah.
obviously I know where we're going to come down, like is that the gospel is a call to love one another and act for justice and all of those things, but I also think people would be surprised at how many small steps you can take that actually benefit and change the experience of various communities in your space that
Yeah.
are not these big loud political statements.
Yeah.
And so like understanding that it's the everyday small things that make
Yep.
a much bigger impact
Hmm.
even than slapping a rainbow flag out front. Do I love a rainbow flag? Absolutely, but that's not what you need in order to be inclusive, and just slapping one up does not mean you are a safe space.
Sure does not. Yep. Um, there's so little things. So for example, like, and this is not related to the LGBT community, but to the recovery community. So I at the church that I'm at in South Carolina, I was just like, we don't have an alcohol-free communion option. Like, is that if like can we do that? And they were like, oh, I guess so. And I was like, okay, well, so now we have like and so like that in the bulletin, right? If you need a gluten or alcohol-free option, we have that for you.
Mhm.
Like that is an incredible step of a small but incredible step
Yeah.
of hospitality that people don't necessarily like realize unless you're looking for it. And I have a friend
Mhm.
who's in recovery, and when she came to church on Christmas with my family, she was very nervous. Like because they also like, this is the South, right? We have those like aggressive pew gates. And so like the usher opens the gate for you and like shuffles you out. And so
Oh wow.
she was like getting like really, really, really nervous. And then one of our other friends pointed out in the bulletin and was like, oh, like pointed to show her like under the Eucharistic hospitality section. And she was like, it was like all of my, I was so afraid because I don't want
Yeah.
to come up and like not, do the thing that
Mhm.
everyone else is doing, but at the same time, like I don't want to jeopardize myself. And so for that person in that moment, that incredible step, that small step of hospitality goes a long ways.
It's huge. It's huge. And one of
And
the
so
things
there are
that I like
little
to,
things that we can
yeah.
do also for the transgender folks that are amongst us that like, or gender diverse, right? Like there's all sorts of people
Mhm.
who are uncomfortable in binary women's and men's spaces. I'm
Yeah.
actually a person that's always been uncomfortable like that.
Yeah.
And I hated like I hated gym class. I hated changing in front of people. I hated going to camp for that
Mhm.
reason. Like and I really appreciate the work that you've done with a lot of the Lutheran Outdoor Ministries with normalizing privacy.
Yes. Yes. It's so
And like that,
simple.
it's such a
Normalizing
simple thing.
privacy.
Normalize
Yes.
privacy.
It's good for everybody.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, and like simple things like, hey, when we're singing and we're doing, vocal arrangements, are we
Yeah.
saying the women sing this and the men sing this? Or how about we say higher voices and lower voices? And that's more inclusive, not only to gender expansive folks, but also to, women that may be assigned female at birth, but have lower voices and
Yep.
always feel uncomfortable. And so, like,
Same.
exactly. Like there's what I love is about the steps we make to become more gender inclusive benefit everyone.
Yeah.
Like it's things like
Yeah.
that. It's
It
breaking down
does.
the expectations of what's appropriate dress to wear for special occasions. Do you have something
Yeah.
when you have kids getting confirmed or first communion? Do you say girls wear this and boys wear this? Can you just say you want them to wear, if it's a specific color or a specific type of clothing, stop gendering it? Because as
Yeah.
a little kid, I hated wearing dresses. I was
Hated.
so violently
Hated.
uncomfortable.
Yep.
Yes. And so as we make space, it's not just benefiting, what people perceive to be this tiny community, which is not nearly as tiny as they think, but it also benefits so many other
Yeah.
people beyond that.
Yeah. And just that too, like, right? Like, how do we're it's not that like you're necessarily less like doing something specifically for a transgender person, right? What you are doing is breaking down those barriers for everyone. Like, why do we have to
Mhm.
exist in those boxes?
Yeah,
Right?
well, and they're boxes that prevent us from showing up fully as who God created us to be.
Yeah.
And so, what does it look like to make more space where we don't have to try to shove ourselves into these tiny spaces and these strict understandings of gender or behavior or dress or whatever the case may be
Mm-hmm.
in order to be respectable or to be valid or worthy or whatever it is? Like, that's not what God wants for us. That's
Yeah.
not who we were created to be. We were
Yeah.
created to be
Yeah.
free. We were
Yeah.
created to be our full
Mm.
self.
And understanding. So another thing that I like that you kind of share too, for congregations to kind of start this work is do it before you have like that family that's now the catalyst for everything, because that makes them feel like shit. And like, like, so if you've done that work ahead of time, then families just know that like, oh, this is just genuinely a safe space, instead of it being, quote, their fault or whatever that you are making these changes, right?
Yes, I always say do this work before you think you need to. Although I feel like we're
Yeah.
hitting this tipping point where it's like you all need to,
You
like,
need to.
and
Yeah,
more
yeah.
and more people
Mhm.
are aware. But there's still like it's not about waiting for because there are people in your communities, whether you know it or not. One of the
Yeah.
interesting things was when Rebecca came out when she was 8 years old and my spouse was the pastor. And after we walked through that, suddenly every single person in the community was going up to Chris and telling him like, oh, well, my grandchild or my niece or or my
Mm-hmm.
sister or all these
Mm-hmm.
family members that were a part of the LGBTQ plus community
Yeah.
that they had never felt safe enough to share, even though he said all the things and did the work of saying of
Yeah.
saying things. But once you have that like lived out expression, they were like, oh, I can be more of myself here, I can bring more
Yeah.
of my family
Yeah.
here. And so how do we do that sooner? Because you already have people in your community with
Yep.
loved ones, friends, and family that will be positively impacted by your acts of
Yes.
inclusion.
Yes. And yes, that there is someone that's going to sit there that is going to be a hospitable step for 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I can already think of like who the people are, who that is in my current setting, right? Like I know who they are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, those are easy things that we can do. I want to bring up, it's kind of like bringing in a little bit of Bible, but also kind of
Mm-hmm.
touching back on a topic that we like just kind of hit for a second. Um, we've on the podcast have talked about Genesis 1 and the merism literary device that's being used there. And this idea that like, yes, God created day and night and said it was good. And we understand the literary device here that like God also created dusk and dawn and twilight and all the in between, right? God created
Mm-hmm.
dry land, God created land and water and marshes and pluff mud around here and all of those in between, right? And the same thing and God created humans. Male and female in our own image, God created them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
all of the in between. And so part of that for people that like to do that exact argument that God said I created them male and female. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, first of all, we need to do a little deeper. So Pastor Colby Martin, which will be on the episode next week, in his book talks about this idea of like, if you are on one side of sort of the condemning theology, it's super easy because you can look at the Bible and say, oh, this is plain and simple. But in order to come to a place of affirming, you actually have to do the work. You have to learn history. You have to learn about the literary parts of the Bible. You have to learn Hebrew. You have to actually like do the work. And when you do the work, and for the record, I don't think just this about quote clobber passages. I think about this about all of our Bible, that like in order to understand what's happening and to understand who's saying what in the original context, we actually have to do the work.
And this is my high horse. It's why I created a podcast. And so the listeners are very used to coming along with that.
I love this.
And so to say also just like practically for people who are like, well, God created them male and female. Okay. What we actually know in the 21st century is like, well, that's not actually just necessarily true, right? Like there's actually not true, right? That there are people that, yes, are created with a strictly XX and XY chromosome and either have a penis or a vagina. There are also people that have like XY and XYY and have like different sets of chromosomes, that it's not just totally the same. We also know that there are people which, are intersex, which have either ambiguous genitalia when they're born or they have both. And that's just how people are created and born. And we also know that people's hormones vary differently and how that influences their body. Like someone who produces, typically, if you are XX, you produce more estrogen and less testosterone. And XY the opposite, right? Like everyone's bodies produce both, right? So if you have XY, you typically produce more testosterone and less estrogen. That's not true for everybody. Depending on also what those combinations are, like people's bodies are different, present differently, like we function differently based on those different levels and how our bodies are created. So that's just like me just factually saying, like, fact check yourself, because that's just not true. And to also say, so then all of those people that are born outside of that specific XX or XY with a very clear penis or a very clear vagina fall into this category of gender diverse. And we are still struggling to include them in the world. And that's what the bigger issue is understanding that like people just exist outside of that. God still knows them. God created them in the womb. God said, I know you before you were born. Okay, cool. So what is our job to help change and expand our system so that those people are there? Because God says they are made in my image and they are good.
Well, and knowing that like this is a part of the beautiful diversity of God's creation, like the idea that we think God only made things that fit in this tiny box over here and then in this tiny box over here, like our God is so much bigger than that. Come on. And so understanding that there's just, even at the basic body level, there is so much more diversity in God's creation than most of us were raised to believe, honestly.
And another thing with it too that we kind of briefly touched is the medical piece of it. So for a good chunk of modern science, when a child was born with what they would say, quote, ambiguous genitalia, doctors, without even the consent of the parents, would make a judgment and then do surgical procedures on the newborn baby to make their genitalia look more like one or the other. Based on purely external genitalia, having no idea what's going on the inside. Like, so imagine being born in that state and like they made a decision that, we're going to make that a penis. Yeah, we could probably, right. Okay. And yourself to not, and it's never felt right. And it's always felt like you're being put in a place that like you don't belong or you don't identify with, or like you're supposed to do things that are quote masculine. And like, it's not, like it puts you in such a, like you feel like your life doesn't fit on you. Right. And so, imagine going through the world like that. And the world says, no, you have to be this way, or there's something wrong with you. Imagine going through the world like that and actually discovering, I can be myself. And then a politician says, no, you can't. And then we wonder why folks that are gender diverse have such a high rate of anxiety and depression and suicide. It's not because they themselves have mental health issues. It's because the world gave them.
100%. Yeah, no, this community does not struggle because there's something wrong with them. They struggle because of what they face in society.
Yeah.
And we know that because we see the statistics on the flip side that support and affirmation saves lives. When people of all ages, but especially young people, we have great data, are supported and affirmed and allowed to be themselves in the world, they have rates of anxiety and depression that are comparable to that of their cisgender siblings and peers. And with admittedly sometimes a statistically relevant uptick in anxiety, but again, we go back to what they continue to face in the world. That makes sense. But overwhelmingly, support and affirmation literally saves lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because knowing that who you are is who God created you to be, and that is good, is such a powerful thing. And hearing the opposite is an act of violence.
Yeah.
Just a straight up act of violence.
And you, I love how graceful you put it. And also your own story that you guys were willing to do this, of saying like, you're not going to have to choose between your faith and your child, but you may have to choose between your church and your child.
Yeah.
So for anyone out there that's listening, either because we do have a chunk of LGBTQ plus listeners, and I'm thinking of a couple very specific of my favorite of our trans listeners, that have been in that situation. And like, here's the thing is, so what I want to say to churches is, be the space that people can find refuge in. Be the space that, knowing that this family is going through such a difficult and monumental moment in their lives, and they need you. They need that space to exist. They need a place where they can come and just be a family, and they don't have to cross all the red tape or do all the things or have people ask a bunch of inappropriate questions to their child, right? Like, what would that look like to me? Like, that is the beauty of the body of the Christ and the church. Like, for us to truly be the church in the world, to be that space where people can come and be.
Yeah. This is what it can look like when you truly walk alongside someone, when you show up and see who they are and create that refuge, like you said. It looks more like the kingdom of God here on earth. Like, that's what this looks like. That's what we're called to do. And to do that, we have to loudly, boldly, and joyfully say that trans and non-binary and gender diverse people are created in the image of God to be exactly who they know themselves to be, and that is good.
Yes. And God said it is good. It is very good, actually. There are also, for folks that do like to dive into the Bible, there are many gender nonconforming folks in the Bible. One of my favorite that you talked about, because one of my favorite stories of all time is the story of Joseph, because it's got all the things, right? And like, I also like, I don't have the level of forgiveness for people. I actually was like thinking about that in a fresh eyes, like thinking of my actual brothers, and was like, no, I can't.
Absolutely not. I could not do that.
As also what you said, like, the same thing with like inclusion, right? Of sort of like, you are still loved, you are still loved by God. You are still welcome to all the riches, the treasures, whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are welcome in this space if you're going to be harmful to people. This is my campus ministry, old campus ministry students would quote me saying, Jesus loves you, but I think you're an asshole. And that's pretty much where I continue to come down with most people, which is also why I pray and I'm grateful every day to God that I'm not responsible for anyone's salvation or judgment. That those that is beyond me for a good reason.
So above my pay grade.
Exactly. But the story with Joseph, right? And so the idea that like, he's the son that's not out in the field doing the hard work, right? He's hanging out with the women all the time. And then he has this lavish coat that he gets to wear, which we do, like, you notice.
Dress.
Yes. That there's a feminine word attached to it, because the only other time that this word is used is to also describe a lavish dress of that a female character wears. Okay, so we have the youngest son, the most favorite son, running around with the women wearing a pretty dress.
Yes. I love it. I love it so much.
And so in their hyper masculinity culture, what do?
They beat him.
They beat him and sell him into slavery.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. What else do you do?
And he comes out with forgiveness on the other side, and I just don't.
Yeah, it really is hard to comprehend. And yet, and I know this, and I would never say that anyone owes this to anyone. Like you said, you are a beloved child of God, and that doesn't mean you get to be in relationship with me.
Yes.
But I see that kind of grace given by so many people in the LGBTQ plus community in relationships. And it astounds me. And they heap it on us, on the church, in ways that we will never deserve. And so I would like to name that. And while say that is not necessary, and boundaries keep us safe and are important and valid. And also I want to acknowledge the level of grace that is just poured out on so many of us.
And, I talk like I'm this huge asshole, right? I'm not. And also there are members in my family that have done and said horrible things to my spouse and I. And while I don't think we're ever going to receive an apology, our relationship is in a more beautiful place than it's ever been, right? And so like the forgiveness happened even though the contrition wasn't even there.
Mm-hmm. And it's how do you navigate that while keeping yourself some level of safe, and so I mean that's the beauty of the Holy Spirit working in and among us, that we can put up boundaries, and yet even without apologies, even in situations where we think we could never get to the other side and be in relationship with one another, the Holy Spirit does her thing, and sometimes we end up in places we don't expect.
Yeah, that's very true. And another person in a place that they don't expect, the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, which came up very recently in the lectionary, so folks are probably familiar with it. I'm going to draw on another thing from what Pastor Colby talks about in his book too. This idea that there are different kinds of eunuch, that eunuch was a broad term. And so there are like maid eunuchs, so those that had been castrated. There's also an entire category of what they would have classified as like a natural eunuch. So someone that would have been intersex or born outside of the strictly non-gender binary. And so those are people that pop up there too. And what is to prevent them from being baptized? Exactly.
And it's this beautiful example, and like we have to be careful about how much we read into that, and that we can't equate these so often with so much in the text. We can't make direct correlations to people in society today, and yet there is a gift of hope, and acknowledge it, and being seen and known that you are included in this way, in that
well
message.
I think for me it's just understanding that like people existed in that sphere in biblical times, and try to think like, well, this is a new phenomenon. It's not. We just we just have different language, right? Like language has evolved and changed.
Yes, gender diversity is existed around the world, across cultural and throughout time, and we see that again and again biblically, and we see it if we look at other anthropological takes historically. It's so fascinating to look at gender diversity around the world.
Yeah. I hope that this is just giving people a little taste of like why they should pick up and take a look at raising kids beyond the binary. First and foremost, I appreciate how you share your beautiful story, and with her consent, of course, Rebecca's portion of the beautiful story, as well as also just like the way that it's written. It's very helpful to people who are still maybe at mile marker 2 rather than 17, right? That this is a way that you can walk through here. And again, you don't have to choose between, your faith and loving your child, right? That maybe you need to just find a new path and learn and discern and walk the miles. And, that goes for us folks sitting in the pews too, right? That like, we got to do the work, right? We got to walk the miles to create a space. And it is a creating space. And I believe that we are co-creating a space of welcome with God. And it's not a space that says all are welcome. It's a space that says you are welcome. And that's important. That also brings me to talk about the reconciling work. So becoming a reconciling in Christ congregation. part of that is you create a welcome statement. And it's, your welcome statement cannot just say all are welcome. You cannot turn that in to Reconciling Works. They will not give you a stamp of approval. You have to be very specific who is welcome in this space and to name it and to name how you're going to live into those promises in your congregation.
Yeah. And what's beautiful about the RIC process is that even when you become reconciling in Christ, your journey is not over there.
No.
You need to continue to live in and continue
Yes.
to learn. And I really enjoy working with congregations. They've like, well, we've been RIC for 15, 20 years. And okay, and what does that look like now?
Yeah.
What is the world calling you to do and be? And how are you being called to show up now in this moment? Because it's different. The world is different. The needs are different. And also so much is the same. And so how do we keep going on that journey?
And for folks that are listening to this who are outside of the ELCA, many denominations also have similar organizations, as well as like they work together, right? Like even just today, Reconciling Works shared some materials from, oh man, what's the Methodist one called? Like
Reconciling Ministries
Network. I knew it was close, and it was gonna and so they work together, they share. And also not to say that like if you're a leader in a non-Lutheran church, if you were to contact Reconciling Works, they're going to help you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like our work is not just Lutheran, it's the body of Christ. And that's all of us, and that is helping everyone to help create these spaces.
Yeah, and you're not alone in this work. There are so many resources. I mean, this podcast, obviously, certainly my book, and so many other books. And in these organizations, it was one of the most important things to me in the book is that there's a really fat resource section at the back.
Yes, there's like multiple appendices. Like you walk away with many places.
There's all the data, all the information. There's a liturgy for a name blessing. There's faith-based resources. There's school resources. Like, because this is a starting point. It's not an end point. Much like the Reconciling in Christ journey, it's not an end point. Like we just keep going, learning. Do
you have or know of, this is just popping off the top of my head, someone asked me about this a while ago, a liturgy to like lay to rest someone's old name?
So sometimes
I've been asked by some parents about that are like, that we picked out that name, very, very special. Like we want to support our child, but like we're struggling with that. And so like, and they asked her like at some point in time, could we get to a place where like when we're ready, can we do something to lay that to rest for us?
Yeah. There are some versions of name blessings that have that as part of it. There's a lot of caution I would offer to folks is that we need to defer to the person whose name it was and what their preference is.
Well,
and
I don't think that they're not going to be a part of this. This would just be for the parents. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. So like there's some like when we talk about like what we do in public or in corporate worship, and there's some people would be okay with that. And actually, especially people who transition later in life are like, that name was really important to me too. And I would love to do that piece. And so sometimes that laying to rest is actually a part of a name blessing in corporate worship too. But something private like that, I have not seen, but I we'd be surprised that it didn't exist. I'll keep an eye out and send it to you if I find it.
All right. Well, I was just thinking about too, like, it kind of goes, you talk about a little bit as, as a parent, right? Or as a support person for this, like you're also going through a thing. And part of that, like, yes, it can be grief, but like, you don't process in, right? Like you don't lay that grief on your child or your loved one. You process out. You show support in, you process out. And so this is actually what I'm talking about as a family that I'm working with, that this is their processing out portion. And so it's what they're doing for part of their journey.
I love that. Absolutely. You mentioned grief. Grief is like this really complicated word when it comes to this community for exactly like that. And the supporting in and processing out is a powerful and understanding. Like when we talk, parents will often say they are grieving when their child transitions, and trans people experience some distress and pain around that because they are more alive and more themselves than they've ever been before. And to know that someone who cared about them is grieving them just feels so absurd and and doesn't connect. But I think what we need to be clear about is that overwhelmingly those people are grieving the expectations they had, grieving their own experience of. It's about grieving them, not about the person. And so that's why that support in processing out framework is so important.
Really important.
So thanks for bringing that up.
Well, because I think that there's a lot of and this is, I think this goes just beyond transgender folks. I think this also applies to, the entire LGBT community, as well as, even just like other things, right? That like when you don't become the person that your parents want you to be, or whatever expectations that they had, right? Like how much damage does that do to people and like the rest of their lives, that they know they've never lived up to their parents' expectations, and because their parents continue to place that on them, and like to me it's like the movie in Kanto, and why I actually hate that movie, but finally, at the end, when Mirabelle's finally like, I will never be good enough for you, no matter what I do, no matter how much I try, it's never going to be good enough. And for that realization, for that, their matriarch, right, to kind of understand that, like, what her role in her family trauma has actually been.
Yeah, absolutely. I am not one to give advice to new parents, because I know new parents don't actually want any advice. And yet, if I could, the one that I always want to give them is just hold things loosely. Loosen your grip on all of those expectations and wonderings of what this small human's future will be.
Yeah.
Because the more we loosen our grip on those expectations and prevent us from, following those thoughts to their end, whatever end we think they will be, it makes our journey of parenting them easier, and their experience of humaning so much freer and fuller.
Yeah. Amen to that. I do have maybe one more piece of advice that you could give folks, as we have folks from around the country that are listening to that. Some are in places that are more affirming, like New Jersey and Maryland. And some are in places where I currently live that are just now, doing the opposite. How we've talked about how we can make the church a more welcoming space, more inclusive space. What can we do as citizens of this world?
Yeah, absolutely. Find out what's going on in your community. This means at your school board level, at your local level, at your state level, and what your legislators are doing federally. Figure out who your legislators are and get to know them. Call them and email them frequently. Even if there's not a particular bill that's being moved through right now, you reaching out and saying, hey, I'm a constituent, and as a person of faith, this is important to me. That part is key, because people of faith are doing the opposite, are advocating against the humanity of this community constantly, and they're doing it really loudly. And so it is critical that we reach out and say, I am doing this, that this is important to me, that we support this community, not in spite of my faith, but because of my faith. And even if your legislators are doing really wonderful work, you still need to reach out to them, because they need your stories. They need to be able to say and have the numbers that these constituents are reaching out to me, and this is why I'm voting this. This is why I'm moving this along. Your voice and your vote really, really matter. And at the school board level, we are seeing fights in all kinds of states, in all kinds of area. It doesn't matter what the kind of political leanings are. And so paying attention to what's going on, calling your school board, your administration, sending emails and saying, I'm a voter and this is important to me and this is because of that. Thank you for this, or we need this. And then finally, reaching out to your local libraries and supporting them, because they are on the front lines right now in a way that I don't think any of us expected librarians to be, with the efforts to ban books and to reduce access to information. And so if you're in a position to be able to financially support your library who's doing good work, if you can advocate or show up in support when they are ensuring that there are diverse books available to all kinds of people, because we need those. People need to see themselves reflected in the books around them, and they also need access to learning about people that are different from them in positive ways, which books give us.
Yeah, for me, it's like one of those, I read a lot of like post-apocalyptic young adult novels, right? And like, that's how it always starts. The instant we like ban the books and tell people what like we control information, that's the instant it starts. That's how they all start.
Crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah, librarians on the front line. They're like,
Yeah.
the ones I know are like, this was not in my plan. Like, this wasn't on the bingo board. Yeah. What is going on?
And I'll add for folks that are like, wow, that sounds like overwhelming. I don't know where to start. Do a very quick Google search of what your local organizations are doing. So I can say, I mean, at least in the Charleston area. So you have AFA, which is the one specifically working to help support LGBT folks and families. And then what our congregation is a part of, CAJM, which is the Charleston Area Justice Ministry, which is a conglomerate of congregations all across the spectrum that are trying to make this place a better community, both for all people, right? So like the things they're working on currently is racial profiling and policing and the school board stuff, because the Moms for Liberty have infiltrated the Charleston area school board. And so these are the people that are fighting back and say, no, we don't agree with this, and working towards that. So like find them in your local area. They exist, they're doing the work. And so there are ways that you can get involved and be a supportive voice. And I can say for St. Matthew's folks that are listening, or other folks in the Charleston area that are listening, KJM is always looking for people to stand up, to actually go to school board meetings and stand up and say the things. And you don't have to like write your own words. They will give you, if you're like, I'm willing to stand at a microphone, but I don't know what to say. They'll tell you what to say. They'll give you an actual script if you need it, if you want it. And I think most organizations will. If you say, I'm willing to do the work, I just need help.
Yes. And don't reinvent the wheel. You are not going out here and being like, I can now save all the trans people. Let's like, spoiler alert, Jesus is the only savior here. Okay. so listen to the people and reach out. I love that you said that. Find who's been doing the work and ask what they need. Beyond talking to your legislators, don't go out and start something as a newbie. Find out who is on the ground doing the work and ask how you can support them. Find your state equality organization, your local orgs, all of those things. Great advice. And
the ACLU will have letters, pre-written for you that you actually just like have to sign it and submit it, right? Like I do that. They email me like every day and I'm like, great, let's sign another one. Let's send it on, right? Like those are just little things that you can do, right? And each state has it, right? So like I subscribe to the ACLU of South Carolina, right? Like it's, there are easy ways to do things too.
Yeah, and get on the mailing list for a couple of these organizations. Like you can look at the ACLU Nation. Why can't I talk?
That's fine. I can't either.
ACLU nationwide organizations like, GLSEN that works for GLSEN for students and LGBTQ inclusion, or the Human Rights Campaign, or those kinds of things. And just start to pay attention, because they will tell you when the important calls to action are. And so if it's social media, if it's signing up for an email newsletter, just start to tap in and pay attention.
I think the whole thing is just like actually tuning in. Someone in my family recently, for something that has happened in Iowa's terrible legislature right now, said, she's like, I don't really pay attention to what's happening because it hasn't affected my life, and now it is. And I just like kind of want to like shake her and be like, you're the problem. When we don't care, when we decide it doesn't affect my life, so we stay out of it. That silent majority is what's allowing people to do the things that they're doing.
Yep. Silence.
It was the same
simplicity.
thing. Yes, exactly. And that's the issue. So like what can we do? If you can sit on the sideline and say it doesn't affect my life, that's privilege. I had this conversation in a group of clergy actually when I was in New Jersey. We were at our weekly clergy gathering, and one of the other pastors in the group was also queer, and it was Pride Month, and it was actually like it was World Pride that year, right? Like this is a big deal. Like people were flocking to New York from all over. Yeah. And so we're in Jersey City, and like he's talking about all of these things that they're going to do, and where they're writing a liturgy and whatever, and how they're going to honor and have lament and the whole month worth of things. And like that specific like Pride, the World Pride Sunday, and he was talking about like we were talking about like what we're going to preach about, right? Like this was our like pericope study, and he brought up like teaching about pride, and he's like, well, are you guys are gonna like, what are you gonna say about it? And like the room kind of like looked around and like not making eye contact with people, because not a single one of them was planning on saying something about pride, about World Pride being that day, about the anniversary of Stonewall, about any of it. Hadn't even crossed their minds that should fit into their sermon somehow, even though people were going to be pouring into the area from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And later someone asked me and he was like, well, are you offended? And I said, yes, I'm offended, but maybe not for the reason you think. I'm offended because you have a privilege to not talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what if you recognize your privilege and use it to cloak people in your honor?
Mm-hmm.
All right, there's Pastor
Yes.
AJ's sermon. I will stop now.
Yes. And I mean, I just have to add to that. Like so my daughter, my family does this public advocacy. Like we are like public in a very public way on a national level. My daughter is 17. She's been doing public advocacy for the past 7 years of her life. And people love to say how incredible she is. They love to say, oh my gosh, she's extraordinary. You must be so proud. Look at all she's accomplished. And she's okay. I mean, if I could get her to clean her room, that'd be awesome. But here's the thing. I wish she didn't have to be. She wishes she didn't have to be.
Yeah.
10-year-olds, 11, 12, 17-year-olds, whatever, should not be out there having to defend their existence. We need folks with privilege to do it so that the people that are impacted every day and carrying the weight of the burden, and she's a kid with a lot of other privilege, don't get me wrong, we name that too, but like, we need people with more privilege to leverage that privilege so that vulnerable communities can rest.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, Rebecca is just, again, so I remember this cute little girl with pink pigtails. And I think for me, one of the most, and you posted, I think, annually again, of this picture of her outside the White House holding the sign. And it's just this cute little girl with pigtails that says, I'm the scary transgender person the media warned you about.
Mm-hmm.
And like the impact of that image is incredible. And y'all were just at the White House recently, weren't you? Like maybe a couple months ago?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Pride last year, which was amazing.
And by a couple months ago, it was a year ago. Picnic. So cool. That's how well, I try to.
I mean, I don't know that we're going to get invited back this year, but it's always fun when we get to go.
I've never got to go, so that's great. I'm really excited that you get these cool parties. That being said, too, there are other things. I know Rebecca has co-written a book with a few others specifically aimed at youth to read about being inclusive.
Yeah, it's a kid's book about being inclusive. She co-authored
also on the shelf behind you, I think.
It is, yes. I co-authored it with a fellow transgender youth activist, and it actually just got re-released in May by Penguin Random House, so it'll have a wider reach, and was released in the UK and a couple other places. And so it's designed for adults to have conversations with kids, starting age 5 and up about what it means to be inclusive in all sorts of ways.
Wow.
And it goes alongside 2 books from 2 of her other peers, a kid's book about being transgender and a kid's book about being non-binary. And so it just makes these conversations accessible. So often I know adults are like, well, I want to have the conversation, but I don't know what words to use. I'm going to mess up. How do I say it? And these books are the tool to start that conversation so that you can feel confident and empowered in opening up the doors so that when your child or a child in your life or community meets someone else who has a different lived experience than them, they are prepared for that. And it's not a shock and it's not scary. And they're just like, oh, cool. I read a cool book about that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I will also include that in the episode details so people can have a link to that too, because that'd be great. Awesome. And I was going to say, Rebecca also was one of like the Disney plus Marvel real life heroes a few years ago.
Yes. She's a Marvel superhero, which is really wild. But she was a part of a series streaming on Disney Plus, Marvel's Hero Project, but it just got pulled. I guess actually now it's been like 9 months ago. They're trying to find a new platform to it to live. Disney Plus was like streamlining and taking out older content. So it was there on launch, but
cool. Well, that was pretty cool. I made everybody watch that when it came out. I was like, oh, I know her.
Yeah, it's a great tool. And I still have my own personal copy that when I go visit churches, we get to watch it, which is fun because it's a great conversation education piece.
It is. Agreed. Well, thank you. And thank you for continuing to do the work that you do in the church. I know you're going to be visiting camps coming up to help them get some things started. There's a certain camp in our area that's, talked about you coming. So I've heard some about that, but so we appreciate what you do for this church, and that, you know, you didn't start out to head this journey, but what you're doing is incredible. For your family, for the wider church, I know, especially and also in the New Jersey Synod and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on this conversation. It was great.
I appreciate it. Thanks. And again, if you look below, or by look below, like, you know, open your phone and click on the information piece, you will find the links to both Jamie and Rebecca's books there. So please check those out. It's well worth your time. I promise. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on this. You can learn more about the 10 Foot Pole podcast at 10footpolepodcast.com, and find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10 Foot Pole Podcast. And wherever you listen to podcasts, please subscribe so you can get fun notifications for when new episodes come out with fun content like this. And again, look for our episode next week, where we'll dive into our conversation with Pastor Colby in front of our live studio audience. So until next time. Oh, and remember that the 10 Foot Pole Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org.